Hello everybody, and welcome to How to Design Your Divisions in Hearts of Iron 4 101. I'm going to try my best to show you how to turn this into something that does something. So firstly, the division that does everything, so can attack well, can defend well, all that, is very expensive. So you're going to want to diversify your divisions to do certain tasks. Like you're going to want to have divisions for defending and then maybe tank divisions for attacking. Now the first division I want to show is neither of those. It is the Garrison division. And 9 times out of 10, this is the Garrison division. It's just one horse. So what you do with this division is you go to occupied territories, which I don't have because I'm playing as Canada. So now I'm playing as the United Kingdom. The default Garrison division is this. Now this is good, but it's not as good as the one horse. So you can see here, one infantry battalion has 1.5 suppression, while one horse battalion has 2. So the higher suppression is, the less divisions you need to garrison an area. And then to switch that out, you go into occupied territories, you go here, and then you click on that template you made. And we can see that just by doing that, we have freed up about 70,000 manpower and about 2,000 infantry equipment. So that's the first division that I'd recommend you'd make. You don't use this in combat though. You are never gonna click this train button on this division. It is purely just for this. So let's go into what you wanna have for defense. These are gonna be your main divisions. Your main infantry divisions that are for holding the front line, not necessarily attacking. So 9 times out of 10, this here is going to work just fine. However, this right here is probably your ideal defending division. Engineers give it entrenchment, which gives it more defense if you wait in a certain spot for a while. And artillery just gives it more firepower, so when they attack you, it does more damage back. Infantry themselves, as a battalion, are very defense oriented. You can see they have 20, each battalion has 22 defense, but only 6 soft attack and 1 hard attack. So the main stats for your division are going to be organization, which is how long your division fights for, whether defending or attacking. Supply use, which I'll go into later. Soft attack, which is how much damage you do against infantry. Hard attack, which is how much damage you do against tanks. Defense, which is self-explanatory. It's how much damage you take while defending. And breakthrough, which makes you take less damage while attacking. There's also, as you can see, a lot of other stats, but I'll go over them as needed. So as a defensive division, you want this to have good organization and you want it to have good defense. You also want it to have low supply use if possible, so that you can spam out a lot of these on a front line and it won't be sucking up all the supply. But having lower supply is always better. The only real way to lower your supply use is to add a logistics company. I don't believe any countries start out with logistic companies unlocked, but you have to research them under support companies and they're right here. So when you first research it and then you add it to your division, it'll reduce supply usage by 10%. But each time you research one of these techs, it'll decrease that by a further 10%, so up to 40% if you research the last one. Like I said, logistics are always good to have, but they do take up a slot and you don't always need them. Infantry itself generally doesn't use up that much supply. You're generally going to be using this on your bigger, more attacking divisions. But let's go back to defensive divisions. Another really good thing to have on your defensive divisions is anti-air. Now Canada doesn't start out with this, so I have to research it right here under anti-air. So anti-air can either be added on as a support or a regular battalion or both. And what it does is it adds air attack. So what anti-air does is it does 2 main things. One, it reduces the penalty you get from your enemy having air superiority. It also shoots down close air support that is bombing your divisions. Now, if you really like your air force and you just spam a lot of planes, anti-air is completely pointless. It does add a little bit of piercing, but not that much. Piercing, by the way, is a stat. So if you have more piercing than your opponent has armor, then you'll do full damage. But if you have less piercing than they have armor, you'll do half damage. I'll go into that when I talk about tanks. That's what anti-air does. I generally put it on all of my divisions as a support company. You can put them on as a regular battalion though. You'll get more air attack. It'll cost more anti-air, but it will limit the air superiority bonus your enemy gets if they have air superiority even more. Now there's 2 more support companies I'd recommend adding to your defensive divisions. However, they're both kind of optional. Technically, like all of these are optional. Honestly, if you just have your 9 infantry battalions, that works just fine 9 times out of 10. But another thing you can add is reconnaissance. So there's 3 different kinds of reconnaissance. There's cavalry recon, there's motorized, and there's armored recon. Cavalry recon only consumes support equipment, while motorized consumes trucks, and then armored recon consumes light tanks. Now, recon does 3 things mainly. 1, it'll give you 10% soft attack for all line artillery. So that's all the artillery that's sitting here. This does not apply to your support artillery. 2, it gives you reconnaissance. Now, reconnaissance is kind of an odd stat. So how reconnaissance works is basically when you are attacking or getting attacked, the 2 generals that are commanding those divisions will throw different tactics at each other. And what reconnaissance does is while defending, I believe it only counts when defending, it'll increase your chance to counter the enemy tactic. It pretty much just increases your chance to win a dice roll while defending. The other thing it does is it gives you speed over different terrain types. You can see plus 10% movement over rivers, plus 5% movement over forest. That's kind of worthless, but if you're making a fast division, it might be worth it. Now, one other battalion I might recommend putting on your support companies is field hospitals. Now, a lot of people seem to not like field hospitals. It's kind of like you love them or you hate them sort of thing. But what they do, for one, they're very expensive, which is the reason why a lot of people don't like them. They cost 20 trucks and 30 support equipment per division, but they do 3 things, which I think are all pretty worthwhile. One, it reduces the amount of XP your division loses when taking casualties, so that's either defending or attacking. Second, it reduces the amount of casualties you take when attacking or defending. So when it starts out, it reduces it by 20% on that division. This can be upgraded all the way to 50% if you do all the text for it. Actually, I lied. There's 4 things it does. So when By Blood Alone was released, they made it so that you lose war support when you take more casualties, and this also reduces that by 20%. And there was another change to field hospitals, which came in the most recent DLC that adds one thing and costs $20, which is that it adds 10% HP to all of your infantry. Now, your hit points are basically how much equipment you lose when you attack or defend. And if it reaches 0, then the division just disintegrates and it stops existing. And most of your HP is going to come from your infantry, so that's kind of worthwhile, but it's kind of like a niche sort of thing. It really doesn't reduce it by that much. It's just like 10%, so it's worth keeping in mind. Now, that does sound amazing, but they are expensive, which is why a lot of people don't really like them. That's 30 support equipment and 20 trucks per division. So if I have 24 of these, that's 720 support equipment and 480 trucks. So what else can you do to this defensive division to make it better? For one, you can just add more infantry. But why would you add more infantry? So the main reason you add infantry to a division is because it raises its organization. So you can see right now, if I add a battalion of artillery, the organization goes down. But if I add a battalion of infantry, the organization goes up. So that's going to make your division fight for longer. Infantry themselves don't have a lot of firepower though. They are pretty good, but adding artillery, if you want to do damage, is the way forward. So adding artillery, the main thing it does is it adds soft attacks. So that's how much damage you do against infantry, as I said earlier. Problem with artillery though is it does reduce the organization. It also raises your supply use more than adding a battalion of infantry, and it's just one more thing to produce. Overall though, it is usually a benefit. You don't want to add too much though. Artillery has very low HP, so if you don't have the infantry to support it and you just spam lots of artillery, if you lose at any point, you're going to be losing most of the equipment in the division. So you always want to strike a balance. Generally speaking, you're going to have more infantry than artillery though. So that's enough about defensive divisions. Let's talk about attacking division. Now there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. You can go for a slow moving attacking infantry division, or you can go for a fast moving motorized infantry division, or you can go for a fast moving tank division. I mean, you can also go for slow tanks, but generally you want to go for fast tanks. So let's start with your slow moving attacking infantry division. What you want to do with that is you just want to add as much artillery as possible while keeping enough organization that it'll actually fight. Very generally speaking, you want to keep the organization over 40 when you're making the slow moving artillery division. And generally this is what you might end up with. You can add more artillery obviously, but you want to keep that organization obviously as high as possible, but over 40 is generally what I try to do. But the more artillery you add, the more attack you get, and attacking helps you attack. Isn't that crazy? The main problem with this division though, while it does have a lot of firepower, is it has very little breakthrough, and the main thing that gives you breakthrough is tanks. Another thing that gives you a good bit of breakthrough though is rocket artillery. So how does rocket artillery work? Not only is it super cool, but it's also very useful. So rocket artillery is just artillery, but it has less soft attack and more breakthrough. It is a significantly less amount of soft attack though, but it's still more than like an infantry battalion. So if you can, I recommend spamming rocket artillery. But keep in mind, you are gonna lose a decent amount of soft attack by switching everything to rockets. Rocket artillery still has good soft attack, it's just not as much as artillery, and artillery can be upgraded more than rocket artillery. But rockets do increase your breakthrough by a little bit more. And like I said, the higher your breakthrough, the longer you can attack, the slower your organization will decrease. When it comes to support companies, your big chunky attacking divisions, generally you're going to want logistics companies for them, because these kind of big divisions have really high supply use. Recon is always good, and it's even better now since the last update because it gives extra soft attack to artillery, which this division has a lot of. Support artillery and rocket artillery are always good, but not really necessary since you already have a lot of it as battalions. Field hospitals, I would recommend for this sort of division because it's mostly pure infantry with artillery, so you're going to take a lot of casualties because you're just throwing men at the front line. But as always, that's kind of optional. I would not recommend adding engineer companies unless you are using this for amphibious invasions. So it does give a bonus into attacking forts and rivers, as well as movement over rivers and amphibious attacks. But engineers are a defensive thing. But obviously, if you can pay for it, you can do whatever you want. I won't sit here and tell you how to play, I'm just telling you what exactly is optimal. But if adding engineers to everything makes you happy, go for it. I completely understand that. So how do we make a fast-moving infantry artillery division? So you take all these battalions, in terms of other stats, not much has changed. Motorizing your units does increase your supply use, and it does make it so that you need fuel for these things to move. If they don't have fuel, they'll move at 1 kilometer an hour. So you can have your whole army made up of these, but if you don't have enough oil to actually fuel all the cars, they'll be completely pointless. One way to counteract this is to use cavalry instead of trucks, but they are slower at 6.4 miles an hour. I mean kilometers, but you know, that's really the same thing, if you don't think about it anyway. Now what should you add for support for this thing? The same thing that you did with the last one, except don't use cavalry recon because it slows it down to 6.4 kilometers. Use motorized recon. Motorized recon will also give you those movement bonuses, which are going to be very useful for this division specifically since it's already fast. Logistics are a must-have for this division. And as always, support anti-air and field hospitals are optional but very useful. If you're not building an air force though, anti-air is essential. It might even be worthwhile to add a whole battalion of it here, but you know, do what you want. As you can see by doing all these changes, the organization has already gone down, so I need to reduce it. One of the things about support companies is you don't want to max this out. If you see an empty slot for a support company, you don't have to fill it because support companies reduce your organization. Like for instance, the motorized recon company has reduced my organization by 1.2 and logistics has reduced it by 1.9. So keep that in mind. Now, how do you design your attacking tank division? So you can add battalions of medium, light, or heavy tanks. If you have the No Step Back DLC, you can design these in the designer here, but that's for another video. But if you don't, then medium tanks generally are the most well-rounded, while heavy tanks have better stats, but much higher supply usage, and they're generally slower. They're also not as reliable. They also suffer from very big penalties from certain terrain types, while light tanks have much less stats, but are generally speaking much faster and suffer from less penalties in certain terrain types. So it really just depends on what exactly you want. 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to go with medium tanks though, as they are just simply the most well-rounded. They have good stats and are generally fast enough. But if you want a super fast tank that doesn't have as many stats but is a lot less expensive to make, you can go with a light tank. Or if you think that heavy tanks are awesome, which they are, go with a heavy tank. Now the main downside of tanks, while they do give you a good bit of breakthrough and attack, this one doesn't because I haven't designed one. But the main problem is that it reduces your organization. So to counteract this, you want to add motorized infantry. For the purposes of the tutorial, I'm going to use this tank design for the medium tanks. So with tank divisions, the general rule of thumb, very generally, is you want to have it have more than 30 organization. If you have less than 30 organization, it's just not going to fight for very long. But obviously, more organization is always better. So you're going to want to have as many tanks in the division while keeping the organization over 30. So what is the point of making a tank division? Well, tanks give you good breakthrough, but they also give you armor. Now, armor, as I explained earlier, is basically if you are attacking a division and they have less piercing than you have armor, then you will take half damage that you usually would. That paired with high breakthrough means you're going to take very little damage when attacking divisions that don't have any anti-tank. Anti-tank, as you might imagine, is how you counteract a tank division. Generally in single player, though, the AI doesn't make very good tank divisions, so you generally don't need to invest in anti-tank. But hey, no one's stopping you. So you can see if we add a battalion of anti-tank, that'll give us more hard attack and more piercing. So right now, this division could actually pierce itself. Now you can also add motorized artillery to this if you want. It'll give you more attack, and tanks, while they have high breakthrough, don't always have super high soft attack. Well, they do have decent attack. They don't always have amazing attack, at least it's not as much as artillery. So adding artillery is always a win. But remember, adding artillery does also reduce your organization. Now these big tank divisions, a must is logistics companies. And if you don't have an air force, a must is support anti-air. Note that the support companies, except for cavalry recon, will not slow you down. Well, except cavalry recon and armored recon. If you want more speed and you have some line artillery in your division, motorized recon is usually a win. And another good thing to add is maintenance companies. So what do maintenance companies do? Well, they give you a little bit of reliability. And higher reliability means that you take less attrition, so you'll lose less equipment. But the main reason you add it on is because it gives you equipment capture ratio. So this means if you encircle and destroy a division with this and your maintenance company is on there, you will get 5% of the equipment from that division you destroyed. And this can be upgraded all the way to 20%. This is obviously optional, but you can steal a lot of equipment this way. Now, field hospitals are generally not the way forward when it comes to tank divisions, since you generally don't take too many casualties with tank divisions since most people are encased in a giant iron box. It will give you more HP though, which is good for tank divisions since tanks do have very low HP. So those are sort of like the specialized divisions you can make, but there's also more. For one, if you're doing a lot of amphibious invasions, then you're going to want to make a division for that. And generally for that, you might want Marines. So this division is for like attacking islands, coasts, and rivers. Think about like the Pacific Theater. So Marines are just infantry, but they get an attack bonus into rivers and marshes and amphibious invasions. They also start out with slightly higher organization and recovery rate, but infantry can be upgraded more than Marines. Kind of. You can make Marines super OP and upgrade them to be absolutely godlike, but it's a really big investment. You can also only have a small number of Marines. So let's assume that you don't have Marines researched yet and you're just using infantry. Now, infantry actually doesn't have any terrain modifiers, but you will get a massive penalty when attacking amphibious stuff. It just doesn't show up here. Now, this is going to work 9 times out of 10. Replace this infantry with Marines and it's going to work 99 times out of 10. Now, the problem with amphibious invasions is that using artillery, which most of your firepower comes from, reduces the amount of attack you get when doing an amphibious invasion or attacking a river. So you don't spam artillery as much as you would normally. You can still add a little bit, obviously. Right now, just 1 battalion is only 4%, which isn't that much. Engineers, however, do give you a massive attack bonus into attacking rivers and doing amphibious invasions, and it can be upgraded, I think, on the 2nd tech. Never mind, it's on the 3rd tech. Another thing is tanks do absolutely abysmally in water, as you might imagine. Putting a 100-ton thing of steel in the water, as you imagine, they generally don't float. However, you can make amphibious tanks. There's a dedicated chassis for it right here, or you can use the amphibious drive here. And the amphibious drive is a module you can put onto your tanks, which allows them to turn into amphibious tanks. It does reduce their reliability. And generally speaking, amphibious tank chassis are just better in every single way. These do count towards your special forces limit though, the same as Marines, so you can only have a small amount of them. Support artillery does not reduce your attack into amphibious, so that is generally worth it. Rocket artillery also doesn't, and support anti-air I would recommend. It's very hard to get planes out into the middle of the open ocean. You can use carriers and close air support to attack islands with your amphibious invasions, but it's a little hard to pull off. I would also recommend field hospitals since these divisions do take a lot of casualties, and adding more infantry could also be worth it. So that's the amphibious invasion division for the most part. Let's say you've got like no factories at all and you need to spam out a lot of divisions. These are going to be defensive divisions and you just need a lot of them. Now, while the first division I did is going to hold better, obviously, this is a lot cheaper and this can be spammed out in mass numbers. Infantry is best at defense, and if you have a lot of these, they can wiggle around a lot more. You can create a more fluid wall, sort of, if that makes any sense. Combining this with the mass assault doctrine is also like, it builds an impenetrable defense. You just gotta have like 200 of these. But honestly, don't attack with this. It has no attacking capabilities. If you want to make it better, you could obviously add support, but this is your bare bones defensive infantry division. But what about a coast guard? So if you want to prevent amphibious invasions, just make this division again, add an engineer, and this is your coast guard. You can put these on all your ports and it'll, for the most part, stop enemy invasions 9 times out of 10 at least, if you have enough of them. They'll be sitting there for a while, so the engineer company is going to be great since it'll have plenty of time to entrench. I wouldn't recommend field hospitals since they're going to spend most of their time just sitting there doing nothing, and support artillery is always good. But that's just if you want to add a little bit more bite to it. 9 times out of 10, this is your coast guard division. So we went over Marines. What about other special forces? There's 2 other special forces, paratroopers and mountaineers. Both of them are are just infantry that does something specific, such as paratroopers. Now, paratroopers are basically divisions that you can plop into certain areas with transport planes. And like 35 out of 36 times, this is your paratrooper division. Now, personally, I don't use paratroopers, so I don't really know a lot about them specifically. But from what I've seen, most people just use paratroopers as suicide bombers. You want to make them small so that you can spam out a lot of them, and you generally use them to disrupt enemy supply, or you can build a big one that you can use for amphibious invasions. Now, you wouldn't use it for naval invasion specifically, but you would use them to land on ports. This has the benefit of you don't have to have a navy to do that. Keep in mind that not all things can go into a plane. So you can see this icon right here. This means this can be parachuted. This can go in a plane and it can fall somewhere. If I add a battalion of artillery, now it cannot. As you might imagine, it's a little hard to put a whole piece of artillery in a plane and then drop it effectively where it will still be useful. Same goes for regular infantry and pretty much everything, if I'm being completely honest. You can use support artillery though, support anti-air, that works. That will still allow you to parachute it around. Also, in the Special Forces doctrine tree, if you go down far enough with paratroopers, you can get this, which allows you to build light tanks that can be paratrooped. Paratrooped, they can fall out of a plane. The game will let you put it onto this division and use it as a paratrooper division. It's only for light tanks though, and you can only do that when you unlock this. Next, let's talk about mountaineers. Now, I personally think mountaineers are really cool just because they're cool. Albeit they're not the most effective thing out there, they are pretty neat. Now, the thing to keep in mind with mountaineers is combat width. So each terrain has a combat width. Mountaineers specifically have 50. This will be increased by 25 if you attack from multiple angles. So how combat width works is it's how many divisions you can fit into a terrain thing. So if the combat width is 50 and I have 10 combat width on this division, I can attack with 5 of these. All the other divisions just won't enter combat. If they do, they'll suffer a massive penalty. So the key with mountaineers is to match it with the combat width of mountains. And this is the division, I think. Since it's 25 combat width, that means you can fit exactly 2 of these into combat, plus another one if you attack from another angle. And since you're going to be using mountaineers in mountains, probably, that's going to be important. You want them to fight as effectively in mountains as possible. Now, you are going to want to add artillery to this so that I can push a little bit, but adding artillery does give you a malus for mountains. But if you use enough mountaineers, it's mostly negated, or mostly counterbalanced would be the better term. So right now, this division has plus 25% attack into mountains. Support artillery does not change your terrain modifiers at all, so I'd recommend that you add that. Support rocket artillery is always a win. If you're defending in mountains, engineers are amazing. Mountains are already very defensible. If you slap an engineer company on there, it'll be completely impenetrable. And of course, support anti-air is recommended. You should never, really under any circumstances, add any tanks to this division. Tanks have massive penalties for attacking into mountains, and mountaineers do the opposite of that. So that would completely defeat the point. But what if I want a fast-moving infantry division on a budget? Then you use cavalry. Now, at the beginning of the game, cavalry is actually very strong, and it's better than infantry. However, you can't really upgrade it at all. So you really shouldn't be using it past like 1940. But if you want to make a cavalry division, they can be pretty effective. You're going to want to use motorized artillery so that doesn't slow them down. Remember, the main reason you're doing cavalry is because it's faster than infantry. Also, support artillery would be good. Do not add engineers onto a cavalry division because it actually only gives you entrenchment based on how much infantry is in your division, and cavalry doesn't count. Cavalry consumes much more supply than infantry, so logistics could be worth it. And since this is an attacking infantry division, field hospitals are generally worth it as well. Where does mechanized infantry fit in all this though? Well, mechanized infantry is here on the research tree. You have to unlock it right here. Now, mechanized infantry is basically motorized artillery, but it's a little bit slower and has better stats. Mechanized infantry has absolutely wicked defense, just an eye-watering, mouth-watering amount of defense. So adding mechanized onto a defensive infantry division is actually very effective. It has better stats overall, and it gives you a little bit of armor. So you see a lot of people pair mechanized with tank divisions because it'll increase your armor, and that's the point of a tank division. And tanks generally have low defense, so adding on mechanized will drastically increase its defense. The only problem with mechanized infantry is that you have to now produce mechanized equipment, and it also consumes fuel. Now, I did say that it starts out slower than motorized, but if you upgrade it all the way to the third one, then it'll become just as fast as motorized. Now, what about the support battalions I didn't talk about? Military police are used for garrisons and basically nothing else. Recently, with Arms Against Tyranny, they added it so that it gives 20% recovery rate to all your infantry, which is actually very good, but I'm going to pretend that that's not there. What you use military police for is it increases your suppression. So your one cavalry garrison template, if you add a military police police to it, it'll increase your suppression, which means you need less of those divisions, which means you need less equipment. You are going to need support equipment now, though, because that's what military police needs. However, it does increase it by a percentage. So what you want to do if you use military police is you want to make the garrison division bigger. The bigger the garrison division, the more of a refund you're going to get on your manpower and equipment from your garrisons. The other one I didn't talk about is signal companies. The reason I didn't talk about signal companies is because they're actually worthless. Signal companies increase your initiative. What initiative is it increases your reinforce rate, your coordination, and your planning speed. And honestly, there's plenty of ways to upgrade those things in other ways, so it's kind of pointless. If you do want to use them, I'd recommend using them in divisions that you're going to be spamming a lot of. So think your spamming infantry division, because it increases the reinforce rate, which means it's going to get into battle quicker. And coordination is a bit of a complicated stat. It means that all your divisions can concentrate your firepower on one enemy division. I find that the divisions that benefit most from this are divisions which don't have a lot of firepower. So your spamming infantry division is probably going to be one of those things. So it would benefit from a signal company in that way. There's one other thing you can add to your divisions that I haven't talked about. That is the super heavy tank. So super heavy tank is just a tank that's really big. It has absolutely god-awful reliability. It's super slow, but the chassis itself has 90 armor. For reference, a basic medium one has 30. And they changed it recently. You used to be able to add super heavy tanks on as battalions, but now you can only add them on as support companies. Now what they're going to do is give your division a massive amount of armor. And now it only requires 20 super heavy tanks. But super heavy tanks, as you might imagine, are extremely expensive. They take absolutely forever to produce. And if you put the super heavy cannon on it, which only the super heavy tank can use, then it only has 55% reliability. It's also not very fast. It's only slightly faster than infantry. So overall, it's not very good. But if you can pay for it, it's quite excellent. Like I said, its only real downfall is just how inexpensive and unreliable it is. It also gives you massive penalties into different terrain types. For instance, you get minus 70% attack in jungle. You do get plus 10% attack in the forts though, which is kind of neat, I guess. But you do get minus 100 amphibious attack. So you can only really use them in select places, aka pretty much just plains and desert. That's why I wouldn't recommend putting it on your spam out infantry division, because then your infantry division is gonna suck in most terrain types. It's actually one thing that I forgot about. That is the armored car. Armored cars are just tanks, but worse. Honestly, the only reason you really use an armored car is to use it as recon. But other than that, tanks are just better in every single way, and they cost a very similar amount. One more thing I forgot about, Amtrak. Amtrak is mechanized infantry designed for amphibious invasion. It's got all the benefits and downsides of mechanized, but it's also a special force, so you can only have a limited amount of them. And I believe that's everything. That's all the knowledge I have to bestow upon you. Goodbye.